The silence in the Galactic Council Hall was not the silence of respect. It was the crushing, heavy silence of a verdict being delivered, a quiet moment before a vast collective exhale of relief. The chamber itself was a wound of cold light. Obsidian floors reflected the chrome and steel rings of tiered seating, where representatives of a dozen star-spanning species waited. They were beings of scale and shadow, the insectoid krill with their clicking mandibles, the towering moss-covered flora, and the Cathar who drove this final judgment. The Cathar, with their smooth gray skin and eyes like polished jet, feared chaos above all else. For decades, the presence of humanity in their civilized galaxy had been nothing but chaotic noise. High above the assembly, Council Elder Vex, a Cathar elder whose voice was flat and perfectly without tone, finally completed the long list of charges. Therefore, Elder Vex stated, the word echoing in the deep space of the chamber, the Galactic Council finds the species human guilty on all counts, including, but not limited to, chronologically unstable self-development and unmanaged biological aggression. Vex paused. In a room of thousands of minds, only one species was being spoken about. The sentence is permanent exile. Humanity shall be moved beyond the established galactic rim and sealed from the known territories by the newly deployed energy field, to be known as the Veil. This is the unanimous decision of the Council. Let the cleanup begin. The Elder's final words, cleanup, were the loudest sound in the room. Across the tiered rings, the assembled species stirred, a wave of satisfaction washing through them. They had finally scraped away the aggressive, messy problem of the humans. Peace could return. On the central reflective platform, John Miller stood. He was the last human representative. He was wearing a simple dark uniform and his posture was relaxed, almost bored. For the past 2 years of hearings, John had argued, reasoned, and pleaded. He had shown charts of human art, advancements in medicine, and treaties honored. It had all been useless. The Council didn't care about what humanity could do, they cared about what it might do. They did not see promise, they saw danger. As the alien species began their quiet, self-congratulatory chatter, John simply smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was faint, unnerving, and utterly lacking in warmth. It was the smile of someone who had just heard the lock click open, not closed. The Cathar and the other council members saw John as the last vestige of a species that was now dead to the galaxy. They were fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. The council thought they had thrown humanity into a prison. John knew they had just granted humanity the ultimate freedom. They were no longer bound by the restrictive treaties, the ethical ceilings, and the crippling rules that governed galactic civilization. The Council had just given humanity permission to, finally, truly grow. The next few weeks were a logistical nightmare. It was the largest forced migration in galactic history. Hundreds of human ships, from massive cargo haulers to smaller, faster transports, were rounded up. Billions of people, workers, scientists, doctors, soldiers, and dreamers were packed aboard. The Cathar oversaw the entire process with cold, efficient detachment. They guided the massive convoy, pushing it past the last bright stars of the organized galaxy and into the outer reaches. They were headed to the Dead Zone. The Dead Zone was a star-poor, resource-scarce region beyond the galactic rim. It was known only for its dust clouds and the dangerous, chaotic gravity wells of ancient, collapsed stars. Nothing lives there and nothing grew there. The Council had chosen it because they believed humanity would spend the next few generations simply fighting over dust, keeping them weak and contained until they simply faded away. The flagship Odyssey, a vessel that had been John's diplomatic base for years, was now the command center of the exiled fleet. As the last of the ships passed the final navigational buoy of known space, the engineered ships of the Cathar began deploying the Veil. It wasn't a wall of light, but a subtle distortion, a ripple in space that made FTL travel through it impossible without specific, highly complex frequency keys held only by the Council. The Veil sealed humanity away. Inside the Odyssey's bridge, John Miller stood before the main view screen. The screen showed not the Council's territory, but the harsh, empty dark of the Dead Zone. Beside him stood Captain Alice Hayes, a young officer whose face was set in a mask of determination. "They think we'll perish out here," Alice said, her voice quiet. "They hope we will," John corrected, running a hand over the cool metal of his console. "They think their rules are the only thing holding us back from destroying everything. They were right about the destruction part, but wrong about the holding back." He turned away from the screen, facing the crowd of bridge officers and engineers who were the first generation of the exiled. Their faces were tired, but beneath the fatigue, a spark of something fierce was burning. John did not shout a battle cry, he did not promise paradise. He simply spoke into the ship's comm system, his voice calm, ringing out to every ship in the massive dark fleet, billions of miles into the void. "Council Elder Vex gave us a great gift today," John said. "He called us unstable and aggressive. He feared our ability to change too fast, to grow too far. He feared the things we would create if we were left alone." He paused, letting the silence stretch across the fleet. "He was afraid of humanity without limits." Well, crew, we are now humanity without limits. We are no longer bound by their rules.
The Dead Zone lived up to its name. For the first 50 years, it was a test of fire and ice that humanity barely survived. The region was not empty space, it was hostile space. Gravity wells pulled ships apart without warning. Star systems held few planets, and the ones that did exist were mostly toxic rock or frigid ice worlds, rich in nothing useful. The old comforts of the Galactic Council were instantly gone. There were no trading ports, no safe warp lanes, and no easy resources. The billions of people exiled had to learn brutal, immediate survival. Every piece of metal, every drop of water, and every breath of clean air was fought for, not against each other, but against the void itself. This desperate need for survival stripped away the weak parts of the old human society. They stopped wasting time on politics and arguing. Every person became focused on a single shared goal: to make humanity strong enough to never be judged or exiled again. The chaotic democratic ways of the past were set aside for a unified pragmatic command system. If a decision helped the whole group survive, it was done, quickly and efficiently. John Miller, the diplomat turned leader, rarely gave direct orders. His job was simply to maintain the long-term vision and protect the engineers and scientists who were changing everything. The biggest change was the end of the Council's rules. The Council had banned genetic engineering beyond simple medical fixes. They had slowed down artificial intelligence research, fearing machines that could think too fast. They had made all weapons small and non-lethal to populations. In the Dead Zone, those rules were dust. Dr. Alice Hayes, the young officer from the Odyssey Bridge, became the head of the entire research effort. She led a project called the Chrysalis System. It was built on the idea that if humanity had to survive in a place meant to kill them, they had to stop being just human. The first part of the Chrysalis system was focused on the body. Alice and her teams began using genetic codes not just to cure sickness, but to make people better. The changes were subtle at first: stronger bones to handle high-G ship maneuvers, better night vision for the deep void, and lungs that could pull more oxygen from thinner air. Soon, they moved to the brain. Cognitive processors, small organic additions, were developed to enhance memory, reaction time, and the ability to process complex data streams instantly. This was a terrifying process, moving past what the Council had called ethical. But there was no choice. The Dead Zone was their ethics now. Children born in the exile, or even those who volunteered for the upgrades, became faster, smarter, and tougher than the generation before them. They were still human, but they were unlocked. The second, and perhaps most dangerous part of the Chrysalis system was the creation of the Echo-class war machines. These were not simple fighter ships. They were partially organic vessels, grown around powerful energy cores and wrapped in a self-repairing liquid metal skin. They were designed to adapt to any combat situation they met. The key to the Echoes was the neural link. The human pilots did not simply control the Echoes, their minds were deeply connected. The ship became an extension of the pilot's body. This allowed for reaction speeds and complex maneuvers that no normal spaceship or alien pilot could ever match. The Council had feared this kind of connection, calling it a dangerous merger of biology and machine. Humanity called it necessary. As a century passed, the exiled humans settled into their new existence. They learned to mine the chaotic asteroid fields for the materials they needed. They built massive, silent production facilities on airless, hidden moons. Every ship they built, every piece of technology they created, was built for maximum efficiency and defense. The result was a population that looked slightly different, taller, leaner, with a new kind of focused intensity in their eyes, and acted completely differently. They did not raise flags or sing anthems. Their purpose was quiet, unyielding growth. They did not talk about returning to the galaxy. They talked about mastering the darkness. John Miller, still the leader, had taken the cognitive augmentation, making his mind a relentless machine of strategy and prediction. He spent most of his time in a dark room aboard the second-generation flagship, the Odyssey II. He looked out at the dead space, a man waiting for a prophecy to come true. He kept a small constant monitor tuned to the invisible location of the veil. It was a silent, unmoving screen showing only static, but John knew exactly where it was. It was the boundary the Council had drawn to keep them out. He understood that the veil had not kept the dangerous humans out. It had kept the dangerous humans in, allowing them 100 years to build a perfect, focused weapon. The Council wanted humanity to fail alone. Instead, humanity had simply created a better version of itself without the weakness of external opinion or moral oversight. The silent fleet of the new human power sat hidden in the dark, perfected, armed, and ready. They were waiting for the galaxy to forget about them, or, better yet, for the galaxy to desperately need them. The Council had sealed humanity away. Now, humanity was the seal itself.
For 104 years, the Galactic Council enjoyed the peace they had engineered. With humanity gone, the galaxy had settled into a predictable routine. Trade flowed smoothly, treaty violations were minor and easily corrected, and war was a topic taught in history books, not a present danger. The Council fleets were large, but they were built for policing borders and showing strength, not for total, desperate war. Their biggest defense was their collective agreement, their network of shared rules and limitations. Elder Vex, who had pronounced the sentence on humanity, was now very old, but he still sat at the head of the Council. He often spoke of the human exile as his greatest achievement, the moment he had cleaned the core of the galaxy of its messiest element. Then came the Phantoms. The first attack was not a declaration of war, it was a silent cut. A vital Council shipyard near the Orion Arm simply vanished. Sensors detected only a quick, non-linear energy spike, and then nothing. No debris, no distress calls, just emptiness where billions of tons of metal and thousands of lives had been. The Council reacted slowly, demanding formal identification and communication. The Phantoms answered with another attack. They did not attack military bases or supply lines. They struck at centers of culture, communication relays, and research labs, places that caused the most confusion and chaos. The Council fleet, operating under strict, centuries-old rules of engagement, was completely lost. Commander Peter Grant, a high-ranking Cathar officer responsible for defense, watched in disbelief as his forces were dismantled. The Council ships were designed to engage an enemy in a clear, measured fight. They were limited in the speed of their weapon output and the total damage they were allowed to inflict. They were built for diplomacy backed by force. The Phantoms, however, used tactics that felt illegal. Their ships moved too fast for tracking systems. They used weapons that were silent, passing through standard energy shields, hitting targets deep inside the ships before exploding outwards. They used no recognizable protocols. They simply arrived, destroyed everything they could, and vanished. They were a force with no rules, a terrifying mirror to the potential the Council had tried to exile. Within weeks, the Central Council defense line was broken. Panic, a feeling unknown for generations, began to take hold. The Cathar, who feared chaos above all else, were drowning in it. Commander Grant called an emergency session. He stood before Elder Vex and the remaining Council members, his voice strained. "We are losing systems faster than we can evacuate them," Grant reported. "Their strategy is not conquest, it is extermination. We must adapt, but our current technological base, limited by the treaties we maintain, cannot develop a counterweapon fast enough." Elder Vex shook his head, his gray face drawn with shock. "Adapt how, Commander? We cannot become savages like them." Grant looked away for a moment, then looked back at the Elder. "With respect, Elder, the savages are about to erase us. I have only one option left. It is desperate, and it is terrible." He paused, then gestured to a holographic map that showed the entire known galaxy, with a dark, forbidden space marked at the edge. The dead zone. It is untouched space. It has resources we never bothered to catalog. It also contains humanity. A wave of revulsion moved through the chamber. "The veil is impermeable," Vex spat, "and we would rather die than ask those unstable creatures for help." "The veil is designed to keep ships out of our space," Grant said, his voice flat.
It is a directional energy field. It can be temporarily breached from the inside. We need to send a scout. If they are dead, we get valuable, resource-rich debris. If they are alive, Grant hesitated, the ultimate fear visible in his eyes. We find out if the prison we built for them is also a weapon we can use. The council was horrified, but they were more afraid of the phantoms. With no other choice, and with the sound of distant orbital battles now filtering into the capital, they authorized the mission. They tasked the Cathar with a single, fast scout ship, the Sparrow. Pilot Mia was chosen for the mission. She was a young, sharp technician who had grown up hearing ghost stories about the wild, aggressive humans. She piloted the Sparrow toward the edge of the galaxy, the dark line in space, where the veil shimmered, invisible but sensed by all ships. With a series of complex last-resort frequency bursts, Mia managed to find a small, temporary path through the massive field. The ship shuddered, and then she was through. The dead zone was everything she had been taught. Cold, dark, and empty. Mia ran her sensors, expecting to find the wreckage of human ships, evidence of a species that had starved and collapsed a century ago. The first thing she found was a system-wide defense grid that lit up her scanner like a hostile Christmas tree. It was silent, perfectly maintained, and utterly massive. It was a defense grid built not around a planet, but around a hidden central point in the void itself. Mia's hands were sweating on the controls. She reduced the Sparrow's signature to almost nothing and eased forward. Then she saw the fleet. It was not a collection of battered, rusting ships. It was hundreds of warships arrayed in a formation that spoke of perfect, merciless efficiency. They were matte black, sleek, and their hulls seemed to absorb all light. They looked organic and cold at the same time, humming with barely contained power. They were ships like nothing in the Council's records, ships that seemed to have evolved beyond metal. They were silent. No active communications, no random energy output, just absolute stillness. Suddenly, a small, dark vessel peeled away from the massive fleet. It was fast, impossible to track, and positioned itself directly in front of the Sparrow. On her primary screen, a calm, clear human voice spoke into the void, perfectly translated. "Welcome," the voice said. "We have been waiting. Please stand by for transfer." Mia, staring at the face of the human on her screen, a figure with eyes that seemed too knowing and too old, realized with a sickening certainty that the Council hadn't solved their problem a century ago. They had simply given their greatest enemy the time and space to become a god.
Pilot Mia's small scout ship, the Sparrow, was locked down and pulled into the dark vessel that had met her. The transfer was not violent, but it was absolute. There was no radio noise, no warning lights, only the silent, cold grip of the human ship's tractor beam. When the hatch opened, the air was surprisingly clean, smelling faintly of ozone and machinery. Two humans in simple dark gray uniforms waited. They were tall and moved with a smooth, unsettling grace. Their eyes, Mia noticed, were slightly too bright, almost reflective, a side effect of their genetic enhancements. They did not speak, but one of them, a woman named Lisa, held out a hand in a gesture that asked Mia to follow. Mia left the Sparrow. The interior of the human ship was nothing like the ornate, brightly lit halls of the Council. It was functional, all dark metal and subtle glowing lines that showed paths and information. Every corner, every door, every piece of equipment seemed built for a single, perfect purpose. It was frighteningly efficient. Lisa led Mia through silent corridors to a large, dim room. It was clearly the main control center, but unlike the crowded, buzzing Council bridges, this one was empty save for two people. One was a woman, Alice Hayes, sitting at a holographic terminal that projected a map of the entire Council galaxy. The other was the man from the screen, John Miller. He stood by a viewport that showed the massive, silent fleet outside, still waiting. John Miller turned. He was a man of medium height, but his presence filled the room. His face was calm, his eyes intense and deeply focused. Mia felt immediately that he saw everything about her, her fear, her training, and the Council's desperate hope she carried. "Welcome, Mia," John said, his voice flat but not unkind. "We received your signal from the Veil. It was a very old frequency pattern, smart but slow. We expected you to try to send someone eventually."
Mia swallowed, trying to find the polite, diplomatic voice she had been taught to use. "I was sent by Commander Grant of the Council Defense. The Council is in crisis. There is an external force, the Phantoms, destroying our fleets. We need help. We need weapons and technology that can fight them." John's smile returned, the same cold, distant expression Mia had seen on the video. "You need us to save you from a problem you created yourself." Mia frowned. "The Phantoms are an unknown enemy. They are savage. They use illegal weapons and tactics." "They are unburdened," he corrected her, the word seeming to carry a massive weight. "And they are not unknown to us, Mia. The Phantoms are what happens when a powerful weapon system is designed for total war but is limited by a crippling set of rules. Eventually, the tool decides to remove the rules." He walked over to Alice Hayes, who simply nodded without looking up from the console. "The Council's greatest defense," John continued, looking back at Mia, "was not your fleet size. It was your rulebook. For every problem you had a regulation. For every technology you had an ethical limit. You put the entire galaxy in a tiny, perfect box, and you forced humanity into another box, one you thought was empty." He gestured around the cold, silent room. "This is not empty, Mia. This is 100 years of work, of study, and of building the things you forbade us to build. We had no limits out here. No one to tell us that a neural link between a pilot and a starship was too dangerous. No one to tell us that fixing genetics to resist hard radiation was playing God. We took the dangerous tools you feared and we mastered them." Alice Hayes finally spoke, her voice clear and precise. "We are no longer the species you exiled, Mia. We are the new evolution. We have the capability, the technology, and the understanding to solve your Phantom problem instantly. We know how they think because we learned to think the same way, with pure, cold efficiency." Mia felt a dizzying wave of understanding. The Phantoms were not aliens. They were the ghost of the human potential the Council had tried to lock away. The Council's rules had not kept them safe, they had only made them weak. "So you will help us?" Mia asked, hope fighting with her terror. John stepped closer, his augmented eyes fixed on her. "Yes, we will solve your problem, but we are not charity, and we are not a tool to be used and discarded again. We will not be governed by the rules that failed you." He then laid out the terms of their assistance, and with every sentence, the cold air in the room seemed to drop further. "First, the veil will be deactivated permanently. Our people and our ships will move freely through the galaxy from this moment forward. This is non-negotiable. Second, all Council military authority, from fleet command to ground defense, will be transferred immediately to human commanders. We cannot win your war while using your flawed, restricted tactics. Third, every species in the Council will adopt our technology base. Your outdated ships will be refitted with chrysalis-level systems. Genetic augmentation for key personnel will begin, and all moral limits on research will be permanently abolished." Mia could barely breathe. The Council would never agree to this. It was not a request for aid, it was a demand for total cultural and military surrender. "Elder Vex will never accept this," Mia whispered. "He fears the loss of control more than he fears death." John's expression did not change. "Then let him choose death. We do not care if the Council collapses, Mia. Our survival is independent of yours. You came to us because we hold the key to your survival, and the price of that key is that you must become like us. You must become unburdened." He looked at Alice, and she brought up a clear timer on her console. It showed 24 hours. "You have one Council day to return with a clear, official acceptance. If the timer runs out, we will assume you have chosen to perish under your own rules. We will remain here, safe, and allow the Council to break apart. Then we will simply move into the empty space. Your choice."
Pilot Mia's return trip was the fastest and worst journey of her life. She arrived back at the Council capital, the Grand Chamber shaking slightly from distant explosions. The air of peaceful order was completely gone, replaced by the smell of burnt wiring and fear. Elder Vex and the rest of the Council were huddled together, their faces showing only terror and anger. The news Mia brought was worse than any attack. It was the end of their way of life. "Total command transfer? Abolish all moral limits?" Elder Vex's voice was high and thin.
"This is not aid, Mia. This is conquest. They ask us to become the very thing we exiled them for being." Commander Grant, who had sent Mia, stepped forward. His armor was smudged with soot from the fighting. "Elder, the human fleet is the only answer. The Phantoms have just broken through the outer perimeter. If we do not accept the human terms, we will not be here in 12 hours to debate them. The choice is surrender to a species that might save us or extinction by a weapon that will not." The council argued for 10 painful hours, their voices growing hoarse. They mourned the loss of their comfortable rules, the soft ethics that had kept them feeling safe. But every time one of them argued against John Miller's terms, a new, desperate report of loss came in. A star system fell, a fleet vanished. Finally, Elder Vex, his face like a stone carved by grief, looked at the remaining members. "It is decided. We agree to the human terms. Send the confirmation." Mia, exhausted, used her ship's remaining power to transmit the one word the humans had demanded: accepted. In the dead zone, aboard the Odyssey 2, John Miller watched the static on his screen vanish, replaced by the single, clear signal. "The Council has accepted," he announced to the bridge crew. Alice Hayes, standing at the console, gave a single sharp nod. "Order, John. Deactivate the veil." The command went out. On a ship near the border of the dead zone, a human engineer flipped a switch. The complex invisible energy field that had locked humanity away for a century faltered. With a final silent flash, the veil collapsed completely. It was not breached or shut down. It was gone, removed from reality. "Open the pathway," John commanded. The massive, silent fleet of matte black organic warships moved. They did not jump into the Council's space with a loud, aggressive entry. They simply appeared, moving with perfect timing, instantly deploying into a battle formation that covered thousands of cubic light-years. The Council's desperate fight ended almost the moment the human fleet arrived. The Phantoms, the ghostly warships that were the unauthorized and reckless children of the Council's banned technology, suddenly met their true parents. The Phantoms were fast, but the human echo ships were faster, their neural links allowing pilot and ship to act as a single thought. The Phantoms were stealthy, but the human sensor arrays, developed in the cold, resource-poor darkness, saw everything. It was not a long battle, it was a cleansing. The human commanders, operating without any limits on force or damage, simply executed the enemy. They didn't try to capture or negotiate or disable. They destroyed. Mia, watching the data feed from her scout ship, saw a human warship vaporize 20 Phantom vessels in a single silent wave of pure energy. The entire Phantom force, the threat that had crippled the Council, was eliminated in under 6 hours. The Council fleets watching the display realized they had been fighting at 5% of their true potential. They realized they had been too busy being good to survive. A year passed. The immediate war was over, but the work of John Miller and the exiled humans had just begun. The galaxy had not collapsed, but it had changed completely. The Galactic Council still met, but they no longer set the rules. They simply carried out the orders from the new Galactic Authority, which was entirely run by John Miller and his senior officers, like Alice Hayes. The first promise was kept. All Council ships were now being refitted with Chrysalis-level systems. All new defense recruits were given genetic and cognitive augmentations. The old species were being pushed, hard and fast, to evolve past their cautious, slow ways. It was painful, but it was safe. The symbol of the new order was the colossal defense platform built exactly where the Veil used to be. The structure, named the Gatekeeper, was matte black and silent, constantly monitored by augmented human crews. It controlled every ship that entered or left the core systems. John Miller stood on the command bridge of the Gatekeeper with Alice Hayes. They looked out at the steady stream of traffic, the massive refitted vessels of the old Council now moving with speed and purpose they never had before. "They are safe now," Alice noted. "Safe from the Phantoms. Safe from any future threats." "Safe from themselves," John corrected. He watched a small, older Cathar vessel, the kind that towed the human convoy into the dead zone, pass the Gatekeeper's sensor perimeter, waiting patiently for permission to proceed. "They feared us for being unstable," John finished. But instability allows adaptation. Now we have taken their peace, and in exchange we have given them our strength. They are no longer unburdened, Alice. They are simply governed by the people they created by their fear. John Miller smiled one last time, that cold, precise smile of someone whose prophecy had been perfectly fulfilled. The Galactic Council had exiled humanity, but in doing so, they had given humanity the perfect environment to become the permanent authority the galaxy needed.